Nobody helped the old man cross the street until a tattooed biker stopped traffic. He stood at the edge of the crosswalk, gripping his cane like it was the only thing holding him upright. And maybe it was. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe if you love meaningful stories, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I really enjoy seeing where these stories travel. The traffic light had just turned red. A wave of vehicles rolled to a stop, engines humming like restless animals waiting to pounce. On the sidewalk, people gathered in that usual pre-crossing huddle, heads down, earbuds in, coffee cups in hand, thumbs swiping screens. The old man didn't fit into that picture. His jacket was too big, faded around the shoulders, and one of his shoes looked like it hadn't been tied properly in a while. He wasn't confused. He wasn't lost. He just couldn't move as fast as everyone else. That's all. He adjusted his cap and looked both ways with the kind of care that only comes with experience. He knew what kind of street this was. He didn't want to get caught in the middle when the signal flipped again. The countdown had started. 10 seconds. 9. 8. No one looked at him. A young woman in athletic gear bounced in place, waiting to jog across. She glanced at the old man for half a second, then back at her phone. A delivery guy on an electric bike zipped between two cars, completely ignoring the crosswalk. An older businessman stepped into the street without hesitation, brushing past the man with the cane like he wasn't there. The light turned green. The crowd moved forward in one fluid motion. The old man didn't. He stood frozen at the edge, his right foot barely off the ground, like he wanted to take that first step, but just couldn't trust what would happen if he did. Cars flew by inches from the curb. One of them honked, even though he hadn't moved. The old man flinched. A kid on a skateboard passed behind him and muttered something under his breath. The old man didn't react. He just stood there, lips pressed together, knuckles white on the curved wooden handle of his cane. A woman pushing a stroller hesitated slightly, looked at him, then back at the street. She crossed quickly without saying anything. Another light cycle came and went. Another wave of people. Still, no one offered a hand. From inside one of the stopped cars, a man in a tie looked up from his GPS and made eye contact with the old man, but only for a second. Then he turned back to his screen. Someone on the other side of the street was watching too. A guy on a motorcycle. He sat still, arms crossed over the handlebars, black helmet resting on the mirror. His eyes followed the old man, but he didn't move. Not yet. The light turned red again. This time the old man inched forward. One step. He placed the cane ahead of him and shifted his weight. Another car honked. He stopped. People moved past him on both sides like a rock in a river. No one said a word. A group of teenagers walked by, laughing, one of them pointing to something on their phone. One of them looked over his shoulder at the man with the cane and then looked away quickly. The biker still hadn't moved. Back on the sidewalk, a woman in her 60s slowed down and glanced at the old man. Her mouth opened slightly, like she was about to say something, but she didn't. She checked the time on her watch and kept walking. The old man backed away from the curb again. His shoulders dropped a little. Not dramatically, just enough. He looked up at the sky for a moment, maybe to check the clouds, maybe for something else. The light changed again. More people crossed. More cars passed. And the old man waited. He had been standing there for almost 10 minutes. Most people didn't notice. They were too caught up in their own rush to get to work, to get home, to get somewhere fast. If they did see him, they didn't stop. They kept moving like he wasn't part of their world. He didn't belong in the flow. He had become a fixture, like a streetlight or a mailbox. Something you glance at, but never approach. The light turned red again. Cars halted, engines idling impatiently. A delivery van let out a burst of exhaust. The old man coughed into his sleeve and steadied himself. He looked both ways again, even though he hadn't moved since the last light cycle. His hand gripped the cane tighter this time. Another group of pedestrians began to gather behind him. Young professionals, earbuds in, phones out. A guy in a hoodie tapped his foot and checked his watch. No one spoke. No one acknowledged the man right in front of them. He tried again. A small step, just enough for the rubber tip of his cane to touch the edge of the crosswalk. A car rolled too far forward, tires pushing into the white stripes. The old man, startled, took a step back. The cane slipped slightly. He caught it. Barely. Nobody reacted. A woman in a suit stepped around him and crossed with purpose, heels clicking on the pavement. A man behind her followed close, focused on the traffic, not the man they had just brushed past. It wasn't that they were cruel. They were just busy, distracted, wrapped in their own concerns. The kind of people who might hold a door open or say "bless you" if someone sneezed. But in this moment, they didn't see a man. They saw an inconvenience. The light turned green. Another wave of cars surged forward. The old man retreated to the sidewalk, defeated again. He didn't show frustration. There was no sigh, no shake of the head, just that slow, quiet shift in posture. Like he had accepted this wasn't his moment. Not yet. Across the street, the biker still watched. He hadn't taken off his helmet. His arms were still crossed. The leather jacket he wore was marked and worn, the kind that had been through more than just rain. His motorcycle rumbled beneath him, engine humming low, but he didn't move. He looked like a statue. Tattoos on his neck, thick black gloves on his hands, boots planted firmly on the pavement. People gave him space. Some glanced at him nervously before looking away. But he wasn't looking at them. He was watching the old man. Another minute passed. Another cycle of lights. The crowd behind the old man shifted again. People came and went. Some crossed. Some waited. Some didn't even notice the man with the cane. A teenager walked up, earbuds blasting, hoodie over his head. He stopped behind the old man, annoyed at the delay. "Dude, you going or what?" the teenager muttered. The old man didn't answer. He wasn't trying to be difficult. He was scared. The kind of fear that comes not from weakness, but from knowing exactly how much strength you no longer have. The teen pushed past him, crossed between two moving cars, and disappeared into the crowd on the other side. The old man just stood there. He looked down at his hands. One was trembling. He tried to adjust his grip on the cane, but it was subtle, careful, like he didn't want anyone to notice. Someone did. The biker sat up. His left hand moved to the ignition. The engine growled louder. He rolled the bike forward a few feet. His head tilted, just slightly. He saw enough. And this time he didn't wait. The third time he tried to cross, it almost ended badly. The old man had waited through 2 more light changes. This time, he didn't hesitate. As soon as the signal flashed "walk," he took a shaky step into the street. One step, then another. His pace was slow but steady. He was almost halfway across when the countdown began. 10 seconds. 9. 8. A car turned left. Fast. Too fast. The driver hadn't seen him until the last second. The old man froze. The car slammed its brakes, tires squealing. It stopped just a few feet away. The old man flinched hard. His cane wobbled. His knees buckled. He caught himself, barely. But the look on his face was different now. Not just cautious. Shaken. He took 1 step back. Then another. He turned slowly and began to retreat toward the sidewalk he'd started from. The one he hadn't left in nearly 15 minutes. A few pedestrians watched. No one said anything. No one ran to him. The driver who nearly hit him threw his hands up in frustration and shouted something through the windshield. The old man didn't respond. He didn't even look at the car. He just kept walking backward until he was back on the curb. Another failure. Another quiet defeat. He adjusted his hat, more out of habit than anything else, and leaned on the cane as if the weight of the moment had become too much. Across the street, the biker stood up. He'd been sitting still for almost as long as the old man had. Now, he swung his leg off the motorcycle and let the engine idle behind him. He reached down, turned the key, and shut it off. Silence. For a brief second, the city noise faded. Or maybe it just felt that way. He took off his helmet. His hair was dark and tied back. His face was sharp, lined, not young, not old, somewhere in between. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. He just watched. And then he walked. No announcement, no words. He stepped off the curb and made his way toward the street, weaving through the crowd that hadn't noticed the man with the cane, and hadn't noticed him either, until now. He walked like someone who had made a decision, like someone who wasn't waiting for permission. Back at the crosswalk, the old man hadn't noticed him yet. He was staring down at the white stripes of the road like they were a puzzle he couldn't solve. The biker reached the curb just as the light changed again. Cars began moving. Another wave of people passed behind them. One woman did a double take at the biker and gave him a wide berth. His jacket, his tattoos, his boots, none of it said approachable. But he didn't seem to care. He stopped next to the old man and stood still. The old man finally noticed him. He turned his head, looked up, and blinked. For a second, they just looked at each other. No words, no gestures. Then the biker pointed to the other side of the street. Just a short motion. A question. The old man didn't speak, but he nodded, once. The biker didn't move yet. He looked at the traffic, then back at the cars still inching forward. He stepped off the curb, into the street. Slowly, deliberately. He raised one hand in the air, not waving, not yelling, just holding it up. A command. One car slowed, then another. Someone honked. The biker didn't flinch. He raised his other hand, then turned back and motioned to the old man. This time, the man stepped forward. Not quickly, not with full confidence, but he moved. The biker stepped beside him. Side by side, they started to cross. The street didn't fall silent, but something changed the moment the biker stepped into the middle of it. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and covered in black from his boots to his worn leather jacket. Ink trailed down both arms, bold, detailed tattoos that made people stare. One sleeve showed a coiled serpent, the other, an eagle in flight. There was no helmet now, just his face, strong, focused, unreadable. He walked ahead of the old man, eyes locked on the cars lined up in front of them. A few drivers looked confused, one or two annoyed. A horn blared, sharp and impatient. The biker didn't react. He kept his hand raised. That simple gesture, steady, open palm, wasn't angry. It was firm. The kind of motion that told you this wasn't a suggestion. It was a boundary. The drivers slowed, one by one. Not because they had to, but because something in his posture told them they should. The old man stepped cautiously behind him, foot by foot, eyes darting toward every engine growl and every movement of a tire. But the biker never looked back. He was watching everything ahead, calculating distances, tracking gaps, holding the line. It wasn't just about helping someone cross. It was the way he did it. There was no small talk. No need for a, "You okay, sir?" or a, "Let me help you." It wasn't performative. It wasn't for show. He wasn't filming himself. He wasn't waiting for applause. He was just doing what no one else had done, and he was doing it without hesitation. A city bus inched forward at the far end of the lane and stopped short. The driver leaned slightly to get a better look, then nodded, just barely, before settling back in his seat. The old man and the biker kept walking. The crowd on the sidewalk started to notice. People slowed down, some stopped. A woman holding a grocery bag pulled her phone out and began filming. Not to mock, just because it felt like something worth remembering. The biker's boots hit the pavement with purpose. Even though the signal wasn't in their favor anymore, he held the space. There was no panic in how he moved, no rush. The old man, sensing that protection, straightened slightly. He didn't move faster, but he seemed less shaky now. Like the weight wasn't just on his cane anymore. Like maybe, for the first time today, he wasn't walking alone. Halfway through the crossing, a red sedan crept forward on the left. The biker turned his head. Just slightly. The driver froze. That was all it took. Back on the sidewalk, a teenager stopped scrolling and lowered his phone, eyes fixed on the scene. A woman with her daughter paused and whispered something to the child, who nodded slowly and watched with wide eyes. As they neared the opposite curb, the old man looked up at the biker. Still no words, but his lips parted like he might say something, then closed again. The biker slowed his pace, letting the old man move up beside him. No pushing, no guiding, just presence. Equal steps. They reached the curb. The old man stepped up first, gripping a metal pole for balance. The biker followed, then turned and took one last look at the traffic. Only then did he lower his hand. The cars started moving again. The biker looked back at the old man. They held eye contact for just a moment. Then the biker nodded. Once. And without waiting for a reply, he turned and walked back into the street, heading toward his parked motorcycle. The old man watched him go. There were no thank yous shouted after him. No clapping. No crowd gathering. Just a quiet recognition between two people. One who needed help, and one who gave it without needing to be asked. He didn't say a word as he walked back to his bike. The engines had started up again. Traffic resumed, slow at first, like the street needed time to remember it was allowed to move. Drivers shook their heads, some muttering to themselves, annoyed at the delay. But no one honked anymore. The biker moved through the crosswalk the same way he had before. Deliberate, calm, unmoved by the attention. People on the sidewalk watched him pass. A few stepped aside to give him room. He didn't look at them. He didn't need to. He wasn't there to be seen. He was already putting his helmet back on by the time the old man had fully turned around. The man stood on the opposite sidewalk now, cane in hand, finally across. He didn't leave right away. He just stood there, watching the biker prepare to leave. His hand rested on the cane, but his body was more upright now. He looked steadier, not younger, but stronger somehow. Across the street, the biker adjusted his gloves, fastened the strap under his helmet, and swung his leg over the seat. He didn't start the engine yet. He sat still for another moment, staring down the road. The old man raised one hand, not high, not dramatic, just enough to be seen. The biker noticed. He gave a short nod in return, then reached down and turned the key. The motorcycle came alive again with a low, rumbling growl. And that was it. He pulled out slowly, checking traffic, merging between cars like it was nothing. By the time he passed the intersection, he was just another rider disappearing into the flow. The old man lowered his hand and looked down the street where the bike had gone. His shoulders sank, but not from exhaustion. There was peace in his posture now. He had made it, and someone had cared enough to make sure he did. Behind him, Life resumed. People moved. Phones rang. A dog barked. The city reassembled itself around the quiet moment that had just taken place. But it hadn't gone unnoticed. A woman with a shopping tote walked past and gave the old man a brief smile. He nodded. A small child holding her father's hand pointed at the crosswalk and asked something. The man crouched down to explain, glancing back at the spot where the biker had stood. Even the teenager from earlier, the one who had pushed past impatiently, was still there, off to the side, watching the scene with a strange expression on his face. Not guilt, exactly. Something else. Something quieter. The old man finally turned and began walking. Slowly, carefully. Not toward a bus stop or a building, just forward. He didn't look back. A man with a coffee cup approached him, paused, and then matched his pace. "Sir, do you need help getting somewhere?" he asked. The old man smiled. "No," he said. "I'm all right." The man nodded and kept walking, but something about his step had changed. Slower, more aware. A few minutes later, the crosswalk cleared again. The street filled back up. People came and went. But a shift had occurred. Small, invisible, but real. Sometimes the loudest thing in a city isn't the noise. It's what happens when someone finally decides to see. And sometimes the one who sees everything is the person no one expects. A man with tattoos, leather, and silence. Not there to impress anyone. Not there to explain himself. Just there when it mattered most. The street had returned to its usual rhythm. Engines revved, pedestrians rushed, delivery drivers swerved around corners. It was the same place, with the same noise and the same urgency. But for a few people, something had shifted. Back at the intersection, a man in a gray sedan rolled to a stop. He looked out at the crosswalk, the same one he had driven through minutes ago without thinking twice. This time, he lingered. His fingers tapped the steering wheel, but he wasn't checking his phone. He just stared. His eyes narrowed slightly, like he was still playing back what he'd seen. The biker stepping into traffic. The hand raised. The old man with the cane. He hadn't expected that. No one had. Inside the corner coffee shop, a young woman in a business suit sat by the window, her laptop open but untouched. Her coffee sat cooling beside her. She hadn't even taken a sip. She'd watched the entire thing through the glass, frozen mid-keystroke. Now, she was staring at her reflection in the window, wondering why she hadn't moved first. The teenager who had muttered at the old man stood across the street. He wasn't scrolling anymore. His phone was in his pocket. He leaned against a metal pole, eyes tracking the old man as he moved slowly away from the intersection. For the first time, he looked unsure of himself. And the biker was gone. He hadn't said his name, hadn't offered a speech. He hadn't paused to accept praise or tell the world why he did it. He had seen a problem and walked straight into it. Alone. That stuck with people. Especially because no one else had moved. A man in line at the hot dog cart spoke up suddenly. "Did you see that guy?" he said to the person behind him. "The biker?" The woman behind him nodded. "Yeah, I thought he was going to yell or something." He didn't say a word, just walked out there. Another man, overhearing, joined in. "That was the first time I've seen someone actually stop traffic on foot, like on purpose." "It worked," the woman said. They all turned their heads, looking down the street, but the biker was long gone. Just exhaust in the air and tire marks on the pavement. And yet, the silence he left behind still lingered. 2 officers on foot patrol approached the corner a few minutes later. One of them gestured toward the crowd. "Something happen here?" An older woman pointed to the crosswalk. An old man needed help, The guy on the motorcycle, he just made it happen. The officer raised an eyebrow. Made it happen? She nodded. Stopped traffic. Walked him across. Anyone hurt? No, she said. It was the opposite. The officers looked at each other, then shrugged. Nothing to write up. Just a rare good moment in a place that usually moved too fast to notice anything good. Still, the younger officer looked back toward the intersection before they walked off. There was something about the way it had unfolded, quietly, without any shouting, without anger. Just presence, just intent. Sometimes that was enough. And somewhere, blocks away now, the biker rode with the same calm that had carried him through that moment. His face was unreadable. His grip was steady. He blended back into the flow of traffic, just another engine in a city full of noise. But the people he left behind didn't forget. They carried it with them. Into offices, onto buses, through phone calls and meetings and errands. They remembered what it felt like to see someone do the right thing simply because it was the right thing, and how rare that had become. They remembered how fast everyone else had walked past, and how one person chose not to. The old man walked slowly down the sidewalk, one careful step at a time. His cane tapped against the concrete with a quiet rhythm. He wasn't rushing anymore. There was no reason to. He had made it across. He was on the other side, where he'd wanted to be all along. But it wasn't just about getting to the curb. Something deeper had shifted. He had been seen. And that meant more than he could explain. A woman passed him walking in the opposite direction. She smiled politely, then stopped a few steps later and turned around. "Do you need help getting somewhere?" she asked. The old man looked at her for a second. His voice was soft but steady. "No, thank you. I'm all right." She nodded. "Okay, just checking." He gave her a small nod in return. She continued on, glancing back once more before disappearing into the crowd. He didn't need her help, but it mattered that she had offered, that someone had looked long enough to notice. A few minutes later, he reached a small public bench tucked between a tree and a newsstand. He sat down, took off his cap, and ran a hand through his thinning white hair. The bench was warm from the sun. A light breeze moved through the street, fluttering a loose newspaper by the trash can. He leaned back and closed his eyes for a moment. People still passed without looking. Cars still rolled by. But now, he wasn't invisible. He was part of the story, even if he'd never know just how many people had been watching. Back at the intersection, the mood hadn't returned to normal. Not completely. A father with 2 kids stood near the crosswalk, waiting for the light. One of the kids, a boy no older than 7, pointed to the painted lines and said, "That's where the motorcycle guy stopped the cars." The father nodded. "He did that so the old man could cross," the boy continued. "Yeah," the father said. "That was a good thing." "Would you do that?" the boy asked. The father looked down at his son. "I hope so." The light changed. They crossed. Behind them, another person slowed at the crosswalk, scanning both sides, eyes lingering a little longer than usual. A woman with a camera around her neck paused, lifted it briefly, then lowered it again. She didn't take the picture. She just stood there, looking. It was as if the entire street had become more aware, not just of traffic signals, but of people, of who was moving fast and who wasn't, who might need help and who might not ask for it. And on the bench, the old man felt it too. He opened his eyes and looked down at the worn wooden handle of his cane. It had carried him through a lot, upstairs, across hospital floors, into places where people didn't always wait for him to catch up. But today, he hadn't done it alone. The biker hadn't said a word. He hadn't asked where the old man was going or why he was out there in the first place. He hadn't needed a reason. He'd just seen him. And when the world kept moving, the biker had stopped. That mattered. It wasn't a grand rescue. It wasn't dramatic. It was a quiet interruption in a loud city. A moment when someone chose to act, not because they had to, but because no one else did. The old man looked down the street in the direction the biker had gone. There was nothing there now. No motorcycle, no sound. Just the memory of what had happened. And even though he didn't know the biker's name or where he had come from, he knew this. The man hadn't saved him. He hadn't needed saving. He'd simply given him space to move forward, without fear. And sometimes, that's all a person needs. For the first time that day, the street felt still. Not quiet. New streets are never quiet. But still, in a way that made people notice things they normally missed. A stoplight clicked. A distant siren echoed somewhere across the blocks. Shoes tapped against pavement. Conversations buzzed in the background. And through it all, the memory of what had happened moments earlier lingered like a scent in the air. The biker was gone. The old man was sitting safely on a bench, head tilted slightly up, eyes closed. But the ripple he had left behind was still moving through the people who had seen it. Some weren't even sure why they felt different. They just did. Across the street, a woman in her early 30s stood outside a corner pharmacy. She had come out to pick up a prescription, but now she stood holding a paper bag and staring at the crosswalk. She didn't know the old man. She didn't know the biker. But she had seen them cross, side by side. And it kept replaying in her head how slow and fragile the man had been, and how solid the biker looked next to him, not guiding, not dragging, just walking with him. She thought about her grandfather, back home in Arizona. He used a cane now, stubborn as ever, proud, slower than he used to be, but still sharp. She wondered who helped him when she wasn't around. A few feet away, a barista on break leaned against the brick wall of the cafe. He watched the old man on the bench, then looked down at the coffee cup in his hand. He usually took this time to check his phone. Today, he didn't. Near the crosswalk, a delivery driver in a fluorescent vest shook his head as he scanned the crowd. "That biker, man," he muttered to no one in particular. "Whole street just stopped, like it wasn't even New York for a second." A man next to him, also waiting to cross, nodded. People don't do that anymore. Everyone's too busy looking the other way. The light turned. They crossed. A teenage girl, walking her dog, looked up from her phone. She had missed the moment, only catching the tail end as the biker rode off. But she'd seen enough to realize she had missed something rare. She turned her phone off and slid it into her back pocket. Something about the air felt different now. Not lighter, just more honest. On the bench, the old man opened his eyes. He watched a boy run past, chasing a pigeon. He watched a woman in scrubs hurry into the drugstore. He watched the world, as it always had been, but now with the feeling that someone had made space for him in it again. Not through pity, through respect. That made all the difference. A man sat down at the other end of the bench, careful not to crowd him. He didn't speak. He just nodded politely and settled into the seat, pulling out a paperback from his bag. It wasn't much, but it was enough. No questions, no explanations. Just two strangers, sharing a quiet stretch of sidewalk like they both belonged there. Because they did. The old man adjusted his hat and looked down at his hands. The tremor was still there, but it didn't bother him anymore. It had always been there. What had been missing was the reminder that even in a city of millions, someone could stop for you, just because. Not for attention, not for credit, but because it was the right thing to do. The moment had passed. The traffic had resumed. The lights changed. The people flowed. The city kept moving. But some things stay with you, not because they were loud, but because, for once, someone saw what everyone else walked past and chose to act. The motorcycle's engine faded into the distance long ago, swallowed by the hum of the city. The biker was gone. No one knew where he went, and no one had asked. But in the space he left behind, something had stayed. Something that didn't need a name. Across the street, the crosswalk returned to its usual rhythm. Cars rolled past, tires hissing softly on sun-warmed pavement. People moved in clusters again, fast and disconnected, slipping back into their habits. But it wasn't quite the same. Something had shifted in the current, slight, almost invisible, but real. The old man remained on the bench, watching. His eyes followed the flow of traffic. He wasn't searching anymore. He wasn't waiting for someone to help him. He was just sitting still, present, in a city that rarely slows down for anyone. His cane leaned gently against the bench beside him, no longer clutched like a lifeline. Behind him, a street musician tuned his guitar. A child laughed as pigeons scattered. The usual city noise continued, but it felt more layered now, like people were listening differently. The biker hadn't spoken a word. He didn't need to. That choice, to stop traffic, to walk beside the old man, to raise his hand without shouting, had become its own kind of statement, loud in its silence, strong in its stillness. At a nearby hot dog stand, two friends debated what they'd seen. "You think he knew that guy?" one asked, handing over a few crumpled bills. "No way," the other said. "He just saw him struggling and stepped in." "Yeah, but that's what's crazy. He didn't even think twice." The vendor, overhearing, smiled and shook his head. "That's not crazy. That's how it's supposed to be." Further down the block, a woman paused to tie her son's shoelaces. He was young, maybe 5, and full of questions. "Why did that man stop the cars, Mommy?" She looked up, surprised. He'd been quiet during the walk. She thought for a second. "Because the older man needed help," she said. "Were they friends?" "No," she said. "Just someone who noticed." The boy seemed to consider that. "Can I help people too?" She smiled. "Yes, you always can." A bus pulled up to the curb. People got on and off, none of them rushing. One older woman looked around before crossing the street, her eyes lingering on the intersection as if expecting to see someone standing in the middle of it again. She didn't. But that didn't matter. It wasn't about the biker anymore. It was about what he made everyone see. How easy it is to miss someone who needs help, and how powerful it can be when you choose not to. The biker hadn't made a speech. He hadn't stayed for thanks. He didn't wait for a camera or a headline. He just did what was needed and left. Sometimes that's the only kind of good that matters. The quiet kind. The kind that doesn't ask for anything back. The old man slowly stood up from the bench. He stretched his back and adjusted his grip on the cane. It was time to keep moving. He turned down the street, blending into the afternoon crowd. One more person among thousands. But different now. Lighter. Because he hadn't been alone when it counted. And somewhere, the biker kept riding. Maybe to a job. Maybe home. Maybe nowhere in particular. But if he passed another intersection tomorrow and someone else stood there, hesitant, unseen, he'd stop again. Not because someone was watching, but because that's what real strength looks like. Not noise, not force, just the courage to see someone and stand beside them. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy meaningful stories like this, we'd love to have you as a subscriber.